The late afternoon sun drapes the downtown streets in a warm, golden hue, casting long shadows across the sidewalks as the city slowly transitions from the hum of day to the buzz of evening. The air is alive with the rhythmic sounds of distant conversations, the click-clack of high heels on pavement. Amara's strides are steady, but as she nears the entrance of the boutique, something shifts in the air. She feels it before she sees it, a subtle change in the atmosphere, a tension that pricks at her skin. Out of the corner, the tension in the air is thick, suffocating even. The officer's insistence presses on her, but Amara keeps her cool, pushing the rising frustration deep inside, reminding herself that every step she takes in moments like this is a step toward something bigger. She's seen how these moments end before. She knows how to navigate them, even if it costs her a little more patience, even if it costs her a little more peace of mind. Amara stands there, her posture unyielding, the only sound now the distant hum of city traffic and the soft buzz of bystanders' phones as they continue recording. The officer's hand is still hovering over his belt, ready to make a move. His gaze hasn't shifted from her shopping bag, but there's something else now, a flicker of impatience or maybe even a touch of annoyance, as if he expects her to comply any second. Yet Amara doesn't flinch. She doesn't even respond immediately. She simply stands still, her gaze unwavering, her body language quiet but assertive. For a brief moment, it feels like time slows. The weight of the officer's scrutiny is heavy on her, and the eyes of the growing crowd press against her, each pair expecting something to happen, wondering perhaps if she'll fold. But Amara's not here to fold. She's here to stand her ground. Still, there's no need to escalate things unnecessarily. Not yet. She keeps her voice neutral, but there's a quiet authority behind it, a subtle power that lingers in every word she speaks. Amara, with deliberate calm, looking directly into his eyes. "I'm not who you think I am." The words are measured, careful, but they carry weight. She doesn't shout, doesn't even raise her voice. She simply states the truth as though it's the most natural thing in the world. For a moment, Officer Reynolds freezes. His eyes flicker briefly, confused. Did he hear that right? Without waiting for a response, Amara reaches into the inner pocket of her coat, moving with deliberate slowness, her fingers brushing against the cool leather of her wallet. The officer's eyes snap to her hands, his body tensing as if anticipating a sudden movement. His hand inches toward his radio on his shoulder, ready to call for backup at the slightest provocation. But Amara's movements remain calm, controlled. She slides out a small leather wallet, a simple yet authoritative piece of personal gear. It's not flashy, not something you would expect from someone trying to make a show. It's understated, but holds an undeniable weight, both in design and meaning. As her fingers slowly open the wallet, the emblem inside catches the light, the unmistakable seal of the Central Intelligence Agency. Amara doesn't need to say anything else. The wallet's contents speak for themselves. Amara, her voice firm now, with quiet authority. "This is who I am." She holds up the wallet for Officer Reynolds to see, revealing her CIA badge, gleaming slightly under the setting sun. Her name is clearly inscribed on it, Amara Patel. Her title beneath it, Field Officer. The badge is official, sleek, and immediate. The shift in the air is palpable. The bystanders, who had been murmuring in curiosity, now fall into an uneasy silence. Phones are lowered, eyes widen. The murmuring fades into quiet confusion, then into a sharp awareness. There's a collective intake of breath as they process what they've just seen, what they've just heard. Officer Reynolds doesn't move for a moment. His eyes are locked on the badge, his mouth slightly open in disbelief. It's clear now. He's caught off guard. Everything about the situation, everything he thought he knew, just shifted. His shoulders stiffen, his fingers freeze, and his face flushes with the kind of embarrassment that's hard to hide. For a split second, there's a long pause. It's as if the world has stopped spinning, just for a moment. The officer's gaze doesn't leave the badge, but his expression slowly changes. Confusion, then realization, then shame. His lips part, as if to speak, but no words come. Officer Reynolds, muttering almost to himself, You're CIA? Amara doesn't flinch at the sound of his voice, still steady and composed. But there's something in his tone now, an admission that he's out of his depth. This isn't just a woman he can easily accuse. This isn't just a fit-the-profile moment. This is someone with power, someone who knows the rules, someone who has far more authority than he could have ever anticipated. Amara, quietly, but with undeniable authority. That's right. Now, I think we're done here. Her words are simple, final. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't need to. In a single gesture, she has taken back control of the moment. The officer, now visibly flustered, stands there, his previous air of superiority completely shattered. The crowd that had gathered around, some still recording, now begins to stir, shifting uncomfortably. There are hushed whispers. Some of them are embarrassed for the officer. Others are unsure of what to make of the situation. The tension, which had felt thick and suffocating moments ago, begins to loosen. One woman in the crowd, a young professional dressed in a similar fashion to Amara, looks at her with admiration. She gives a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if acknowledging the power in Amara's calm composure. A man standing near the sidewalk shakes his head, muttering to himself, clearly uncomfortable with what he just witnessed. Some people glance at one another, their expressions unreadable. But a few nod in quiet agreement, their eyes lingering on Amara with newfound respect. For a moment, it's as though the entire world is holding its breath. Even Officer Reynolds stands stock still, trying to piece together how he could have been so wrong, so utterly mistaken. Amara waits, watching him closely as he stammers, looking like a man who has just realized how far over his head he's gone. He seems to lose his sense of authority entirely, not sure how to proceed. He looks at the crowd now, uncertain, before his gaze finally shifts back to her, his posture more slumped than before. Officer Reynolds, his voice low, barely above a whisper. I'm so sorry, ma'am. I had no idea. There's a faint tremor in his voice now, the apology genuine but awkward. He's caught in a moment where the reality of his own bias has come crashing down on him, and he has no choice but to face it. The apology feels rushed, like he's trying to salvage something from the wreckage of his own assumption. But Amara doesn't give him the satisfaction of an emotional response. She simply nods once, a subtle acknowledgement of the situation, but nothing more. There's no need to entertain his apology further. There's no need to make him feel better for his mistake. The power is hers now. Amara, with finality. It's all right. Just remember to check the facts next time. She turns on her heel, slowly walking away, her back straight, her head held high. The officer stands there, a silent figure, his shame apparent to anyone who had been watching. Amara's presence lingers in the air for a moment longer, a quiet reminder of how easily the balance of power can shift. And as Amara walks away, the crowd, once uneasy, now begins to disperse, some still in disbelief, others with a new understanding. The incident is over, but the ripple effects will be felt far beyond this one small corner of the city. The officer stands frozen, his body rigid, eyes still fixed on the CIA badge in Amara's hand. His face has drained of color, as though the very air has been knocked out of him. For a few seconds, he seems unable to process the reality of the situation. What he had thought was a simple, routine stop, a quick check to make sure someone was following the rules, has now unraveled completely in front of him. His mind races, running through all the assumptions he made, the profiling he had relied on, and the power he had felt in that moment of accusation. His voice cracks as he tries to speak, his words tumbling out clumsily. Officer Reynolds. I'm so sorry, ma'am. I didn't know. I mean, I didn't mean. He stutters, the words failing to make sense as the embarrassment swallows him whole. He wants to apologize, wants to take back the harshness of his earlier actions, but the weight of his mistake is too much for him to process in a single moment. His hand, once poised to reach for his radio, now hovers awkwardly at his side. He looks at Amara with something between guilt and fear. Fear of being caught in his own bias. Fear of the consequences of his actions. His eyes flicker from the badge to the crowd, then back to her, unable to find the right thing to say. His uniform, once a symbol of authority, now feels like a weight he cannot bear. Amara stands still, her posture unwavering, her gaze cool and steady. Her silence is more powerful than any words could be. She doesn't need to speak to make him feel the full extent of his misstep. Her presence alone commands respect now. She has all the authority in the world in this moment, not because she's used it to dominate or humiliate, but because she's held her ground with poise and dignity. The power has shifted, and Amara knows it. She doesn't have to say anything. The power dynamics are clear. She's already won. The crowd around them, which had once been filled with murmurs and nervous glances, now shifts uneasily. The few who had paused to witness the confrontation, those who had silently judged, those who had looked on in silence or perhaps whispered in the corners, now seem to feel the weight of their own assumptions. Some shift uncomfortably, their eyes flickering away from Amara while others glance back at her, an expression of realization settling over them. As the officer stammers, his face flushed and awkward, the reality of what's just transpired begins to sink in. The crowd, once passive observers, now reacts. There's a shift in the collective atmosphere, a sudden awareness that the balance of power has swung. Some of them have been silently judging from the sidelines, and now they realize they too have been complicit in that silent judgment. A bystander whispering to their companion. "Did you know? She's CIA. I had no idea." The murmur grows as more people process the scene they've just witnessed. Amara stands tall, unbothered by the officer's discomfort, her eyes scanning the crowd. She doesn't look for validation, but in her stillness, there's a quiet command that no one can ignore. A few of the people who had been watching the exchange, their expressions once skeptical or judgmental, now look visibly ashamed. Their eyes flicker toward the ground, some of them averting their gaze, unwilling to meet Amara's calm, unwavering stare. It's an uncomfortable realization for them, this sudden recognition that their initial assumptions about her behavior, about the situation, were all wrong. One woman, who had been among the first to record the scene, now lowers her phone, her face flushed with embarrassment. She had just moments ago been silently documenting the interaction, perhaps out of some instinct to capture a moment of drama. But now, as the truth unfolds, she seems uncertain whether she should have been recording at all. Another bystander, softly under their breath. This is crazy. How could he? I didn't know." The people around them begin to murmur among themselves, some speaking in hushed tones, others just shaking their heads. Their discomfort is palpable. In that moment, Amara becomes a symbol of something far larger than the confrontation itself. She becomes a reminder that appearances are not always what they seem, that bias and assumptions can lead to painful, embarrassing consequences. One man standing near the sidewalk shakes his head, muttering to himself, "Damn, that was messed up. I thought she was just some regular shopper, but I should have known better." For Amara, the shift in the crowd is almost tangible. She can feel their collective recognition of her power, not because she's flaunting it, but because she's not allowing herself to be pushed around. Her response was measured and precise, and that alone has altered the perception of everyone present. She doesn't need to explain her title or prove her worth. She doesn't need to justify her actions. She simply exists, calm, collected, and strong. And in her silence, the crowd begins to realize the gravity of their own role in perpetuating a world where people of color are too often wrongly judged, where biases run deep, and where authority is sometimes wielded without the thought of its consequences. A few of the bystanders, those who had perhaps been too quick to judge or assume, take tentative steps forward, their faces softening. A few apologize with small gestures or silent nods, acknowledging Amara's strength and presence. One of them, a young woman in her mid-20s, approaches with hesitation, offering a simple but genuine smile. Young woman, quietly, almost to herself. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to judge." Amara nods in response, offering a small, graceful smile of her own, acknowledging the apology without saying anything in return. She knows it's not about the apology. It's about the shift in understanding, the recognition of the power of silence and presence. As the officer stands there, now fully aware of the severity of his error, Amara turns her back to him, her body language unwavering. She doesn't need his apology. She doesn't need him to explain himself. The power in this moment is hers to carry forward, and she knows that. But before she walks away, she gives one final glance over her shoulder, her voice low but filled with quiet authority. "Amara," her words simple but weighted. "Make sure you check the facts next time." And with that, she turns, her heels clicking steadily against the pavement as she moves away. The crowd, which had once been hesitant, now watches her go, some of them still processing the power of what just happened. The officer doesn't speak, doesn't move. He just stands there, his face flushed, his mistake hanging heavy in the air between them. As Amara walks away, there's no anger in her stride, no desire for revenge, just a quiet satisfaction in knowing that in this moment she has taken control. And with that, the power dynamics have shifted in ways that will ripple far beyond this single interaction. Amara is a woman of substance, of authority. She doesn't need to prove it to anyone. The crowd will remember the lesson: quiet, calm, and unyielding. And for Officer Reynolds, this moment will linger as a reminder of how easy it is to misjudge and how important it is to never assume. The air around Amara feels heavier now, laden with the lingering weight of the confrontation. As she walks away, there's a steady cadence to her steps, purposeful, calm, and unbroken. The noise of the crowd, the murmurs, the hushed whispers that had been rising throughout the exchange begin to fade as the scene settles into a quiet aftermath. But then, just as she reaches the curb, she hears a voice behind her, strained, almost desperate. "Officer Reynolds." "Miss Patel." Amara doesn't stop at first. Her heels continue to click on the pavement, each step deliberate, but her ears catch the tone of his voice, and something in her pauses. She doesn't look back right away, but she can feel his presence now, shifting, unsure, clearly struggling with the weight of his own mistake. After a beat, she stops, turns, and faces him, her posture still poised, her gaze steady. "Officer Reynolds." I sincerely apologize for my actions, Miss Patel." His voice is softer now, tinged with the embarrassment and humility of someone who has finally realized the full extent of their error. He shifts awkwardly on his feet, his uniform not quite fitting the role it had moments before, like he's trying to reclaim some sense of authority, but knowing it has been utterly shaken. For a moment, Amara doesn't say anything. She simply watches him, her expression unreadable. His apology, though genuine, feels almost too little, too late. But Amara isn't in this for an apology. She's not here to exact revenge or humiliate him. This moment, this quiet reflection of his actions, is far more powerful than any angry words or public reprimand could ever be. Officer Reynolds, I didn't know who you were. I had no idea. I never meant for it to. I'm just so sorry. His voice trails off, and for a split second, Amara sees the full weight of his realization. It's not just that he made an error. It's that his assumptions, his bias, have just been exposed in front of a crowd. He's embarrassed, yes, but beneath the shame, there's also a hint of something else. Understanding. A recognition that this wasn't just a simple mix-up. This was a moment that revealed something deeper, something ingrained in how he perceives the world and the people within it. Amara lets the silence linger for a few seconds longer, allowing the weight of his words to settle between them. She could speak now, could tear into him with the sharpness of righteous anger. But that's not who she is. Her strength doesn't come from making others feel small. It comes from standing tall, from refusing to let this moment define her. Amara, her voice calm but firm. I appreciate your apology, Officer Reynolds, she says, her tone measured, yet filled with unspoken depth. But I don't need it. What you need to understand is that this wasn't just a mistake. It was a moment of bias. There's no anger in her voice, just truth. Her words are simple, but they cut to the heart of the issue. She isn't interested in making him feel guilty for the rest of his life, but she also isn't going to let him off the hook without understanding why what happened matters. Why her being stopped, singled out, and judged was wrong on a level that went far beyond this particular exchange. Amara, I expect better next time, but I'm not here to make your life harder. She pauses, her eyes locking with his, allowing the weight of her statement to settle. Just remember, appearances are deceiving. With that, she turns away from him, once again heading toward the sidewalk where her car is parked. Her coat flows behind her as she walks, each step a quiet affirmation of her power, not the kind that is flaunted, but the kind that comes from unwavering self-assurance. Behind her, Officer Reynolds watches her leave. His hands are now clasped in front of him, and though his apology still hangs in the air, it's clear he's learned something important today, something he will likely carry with him far beyond this encounter. As he watches her walk away, the guilt remains, but so does the understanding of how fragile and biased his assumptions had been. As Amara reaches her car, she can hear a few voices from the crowd still murmuring behind her. She doesn't turn around, doesn't let their opinions sway her. She doesn't need their validation, though she knows some of them are reconsidering their initial judgments. Some of them are regretting the way they had thought about her earlier, seeing now the power of what just happened, the power of standing your ground without raising your voice, without making a scene. And then, as if drawn by an invisible thread, a few people from the crowd begin to approach her. They're tentative at first, unsure whether they should engage, but they do, one by one. A middle-aged man steps forward, his face flushed with regret. He hesitates, then speaks, his voice low and sincere. Middle-aged man. Ma'am, I just want to apologize. I didn't speak up earlier, but I saw what happened and I'm sorry for not doing something sooner. Amara glances at him, her expression calm, acknowledging the sincerity of his words without a need for further elaboration. She doesn't engage in a long conversation with him. There's no need. He understands the gravity of the moment, and so does she. She nods once, a silent recognition of his change in perception. Amara. Thank you, she says quietly, her voice carrying no judgment, just quiet appreciation for his humility. Another young woman who had been quietly filming the scene on her phone earlier steps forward, looking almost embarrassed by her earlier actions. Young woman, I'm really sorry. I didn't realize what was happening. I didn't mean to make it worse. Amara nods again, this time with a small, reassuring smile. She understands that people are often quick to react based on surface-level observations. It's how they learn that matters, not just the apology. Amara. It's all right. It's just important to recognize what's happening in those moments, that's all. The young woman nods, her face softening with understanding. She doesn't say anything more. She doesn't need to. With that, Amara turns her attention to the officer, who is still standing on the sidewalk, watching her as she prepares to get into her car. She doesn't offer him another glance, doesn't give him any further acknowledgement. There's no need for him to feel like he has to redeem himself to her. This moment has already spoken volumes. Amara slides into her car, her movements fluid, natural. She takes a moment, sitting still for a beat, her hands resting lightly on the wheel. She reflects for a moment on the power of quiet strength. How sometimes doing nothing but being yourself can bring about the greatest change. As she drives away, the officer is still there, watching her retreating figure. She has moved on, but the weight of this moment will stay with him. For Amara, this moment will be just another chapter in a life filled with battles fought in silence, in strength, and in the quiet recognition that no matter how many times she is judged, she will always rise above it. As Amara drives away, the city streets blur past her, the last vestiges of the sunset casting an amber glow across the horizon. The car's engine hums softly, a rhythm that seems to mirror her thoughts. For a few moments, the only sound in the car is the low hum of the tires against the pavement and the gentle click of the turn signal. She doesn't rush to leave the scene, though. The tension from earlier is fading, and in its place is something steadier, quieter. Something that feels like a subtle victory, a quiet reaffirmation of her own strength and resilience. She grips the steering wheel lightly, her fingers tracing the smooth surface, a reflection of her calm after the storm. The anger she felt when the officer first approached her has long since dissipated. What was once a fire inside her, fueled by frustration and the all-too-familiar sting of racial profiling, has softened into a deep, quiet pride. She reflects for a moment on everything she's been through, on how many times she's found herself in situations just like this, facing prejudice, being unfairly judged, fighting battles that no one else could see. But each time, she's emerged stronger, more resilient, more aware of her own worth. She knows the journey hasn't been easy. There have been days when she's doubted herself, days when the weight of systemic bias felt unbearable, days when she wanted to scream, to fight back. But each time she's been knocked down, she's gotten back up, calmer, wiser, and more determined than before. Her mind drifts back to the confrontation with Officer Reynolds. His apology, though humbling, was just one part of a much larger lesson, a lesson that she's learned over and over. The world doesn't always see you for who you are, but that doesn't mean you can't define who you are. It doesn't mean you can't hold your head high, even when people try to box you in or make assumptions based on how you look or where you're from. Amara knows that her strength doesn't come from her job or her title, although they're both important parts of who she is. It comes from the quiet certainty in herself. It comes from the knowledge that she can face whatever the world throws her way. And even if it's unfair, even if it's wrong, she doesn't have to bend. She can stand tall, let the truth speak for her, and let everything else fall away. As she drives, her thoughts shift from the incident to her career, how far she's come, the obstacles she's faced, and the hard-won victories that have shaped her. There's no grand celebration, no moment of fanfare for each step forward. It's all been a quiet accumulation of strength, of perseverance. Her eyes flicker to the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of her own reflection, a steady, composed image that's become second nature. There's no anger there anymore, just a sense of quiet, unwavering confidence. She reaches a stoplight and slows down, her mind momentarily drifting again to the faces in the crowd earlier. The people who had watched the exchange, some of whom had silently judged, and others who had felt the weight of their own assumptions. She knows those people will leave with a different perspective. They will carry the memory of her composure, her quiet strength, and the unspoken power that comes from standing your ground. The light turns green and she accelerates, the city unfolding before her as she drives toward whatever comes next. Her voice, soft but clear, cuts through the silence of the car. It's a reflection, a moment of understanding. Amara's voiceover, reflective. In a world that's so quick to judge, sometimes you don't have to say a word. You just need to be yourself, be strong, and let the truth speak for you. The words linger in the air, a quiet mantra for anyone who's ever faced injustice or been underestimated. Amara doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. She knows her worth, and that is more than enough. As the car merges onto a wider road, her path ahead is clear, not just in the literal sense, but in the quiet certainty that no matter where life takes her, she'll keep walking her own path with pride.